Budget 2014-2015 that will be presented to the nation on Thursday next week. It's coming exactly a week after the president presented the State of the Nation address, and people have been questioning, did he actually present a State of the Nation address? By watching the president, Charles Boji was analyzing with people in the same studio as the presentation was being done just behind you here, and people asking, do I now have an idea what the state of the Ugandan nation is by listening to the president? Other people questioned and said, he's talking politics. He spent all the time joking with members of parliament. He thought the state of the nation is supposed to be some more serious thing, and that leaders are supposed to elevate themselves, not to be talking at the same language level as the people they lead, because then no one is providing leadership. Chris, let me come back to you. 15 years ago, precisely about 15 years ago, 15, 16 years ago, if a budget was going to be read, you found people in a trading center in Amuria crowding around a trading center on a single radio station, a single radio receiver, listening to the budget, because there possibly was something going to be said that related to them directly. You'd find people huddled together in some corner in my village, somewhere in Kabarole district, trying to listen, because teachers would know there might be some announcement that impacts us. Ordinary peasants would find something that relates to them. Today, it's difficult to find border riders crowding around a small radio station to listen to a budget speech. Why do you think that is happening?
One, because first of all, there had been a promise from the NRM that theirs was a fundamental change. And you know, all of these intellectual words they used to bring, building a self-sustaining, integrated, whatever they call it, and the inward and backward linkages, you know, that time, trickle-down effect, those bombastic words were given to everybody in Uganda. So people were saying, there's a promise. Over time, they have realized it was air. Hot air too. So the border men are saying, if you don't run around, there's nothing. They have left us to what they call free marketeers. Those who say the market will sort out themselves. Actually, free marketeers are as politically motivated and involved as anyone else, but they pretend to be providing a solution to outside politics. But what I can tell you, and Charles, this is deep from my heart and from a few lessons I've taken. President Museveni's State of the Nation address was heavy in political content, very lacking in technical content. And that's typical of him. He's a player. He's holding power. No one beats him so far in Uganda. So whatever he's doing is for him to hold on to power.
Let me ask this question. NTV, all the TV stations that you can imagine will be worth their name, and including those that may not be, will be dedicating immense amounts of airspace on Thursday to the budget speech. You'll have teams inside here analyzing the budget. Before you even go, Chris, you walked out of the newsroom at the Monitor to come for this show. I'm not sure you'll be going home now. You might be going back. But on Thursday, on Friday, you'll dedicate acres of column and newsprint to the budget speech. Why? If it doesn't speak to the people who are reading you in the newspaper, or watching you.
I've heard the saying garbage in, garbage out. If that is what is in your country, why will the media get what to put there? If that is what is obtained from leadership, if you don't report, actually, you are called an enemy media. You must, politics runs the world. Politics runs human life. But that's not what I want to discuss. I want to talk about why, in the previous years, budgets have lost the meaning in the lives of people. I had Buoki, of course, he reasoned in corporate and that class.
I actually forgot to introduce him as a business editor.
You lowered him, but he's not, he's not affected by that. He's not, I don't think he's bothered by titles. He's a business editor. But I like, me, I like calling myself, I am a common man's journalist. But even among us journalists, there are those who have become the A-class journalists, the what kind of journalists. So they will look issues from Adam Smith, from New York Stock Exchange. I am not that type, Charles. I am a humble boy, a peasant from Bukedea, and I must come reflecting the needs of those people. Here is why I think President Museveni's State of the Nation address and Thursday's budget will not be any less different from what he has been doing before. Any action, political action, economic action, social action, must benefit people. But when you see they're beginning to talk infrastructure, electricity, you know, these are like things on their own that don't have a connection to people's lives. I never heard President Museveni say, for anything to happen, our human resource must be involved, must be engaged, must be motivated, such that we see development. He is putting people at the side and is pretending to pursue electricity, infrastructure, as if these things, these people of the past die. In other words, his planning is not for you who's poor today. It's not for you who's struggling now. It's for those who are okay now to continue enjoying their lives.
And create a better class in future.
Better class for all the Charles. If you realize, as a public policy student, you notice policies are formulated at that level. And everybody knows that generally, cabinet, parliament. But over time, I've discovered policies are actually made at a street level. There are people we call in policy street level bureaucrats. We ignore them. These are the police, the nurses, the medical workers, you see.
They call them foot soldiers.
Whatever you call them, foot soldiers, the soldiers, those who go to front line. These are frontline policy makers. But their policy is not in the paper. Cabinet can originate a policy and say, we want to do this. Like we have all the children must attend class. This is a very important point. But if you want all children to attend class, there is somebody, Museveni will never enter a classroom to teach. It is either Mwangusha or Charles or Melina. Now, if you are not in your planning involving Melina's welfare, and you're churning out policy after policy, you are daydreaming. Melina will change the policy in the class to suit her own environment. So in this speech of the president, he is ignoring people.
There's a critical question about context of the budget and how it fits in with the people who actually do the implementation on the ground. We have discussed here before the service delivery indicator report of the World Bank and how service delivery is done at the delivery point. And like Chris says, if a policeman tells you you are not going into this direction, you're going to stand there, whether you want or not, you're going to stand.
I would turn anyway.
Yes, you can't argue with them. But how do you make budgeting relevant to the people who use it? Listening to the president, and I agree with you, Chris, I couldn't tell where the ordinary peasant fits in.
Yeah, well,
where they can try to lift their own lives and feel they are part of a national planning. And yes, you get that imagination. We are imagining of a Kampala maybe in 2040. We are sending a rocket to the moon. We are running bullet trains. But the people who are supposed to be in those bullet trains are the people you'll find at Acacia Mall, not the people who are shopping at the Duka in my village. How do you get the people to get involved? And do you think the Thursday budget will try to address this?
Yeah, well, I think this State of the Nation speech, I agree with Chris, it didn't say very much about human resource. The previous budget speech, the previous State of the Nation speech, I actually like the setup of that speech better. I think some people, poked a bit of fun at the bottleneck approach, but I actually think it was a good approach. I'm not sure about the execution, but one of the bottlenecks identified was a human resource bottleneck, which is true. If you don't have a healthy population, and last year the president actually spent quite a bit of time talking about various health issues. He talked about health centers, which didn't feature at all in this State of the Nation address. So I think, I don't know if that reflects an actual change in strategy, which would be unfortunate. And we see, the allocation to education decreasing, both in terms of the absolute dollar figure and in terms of the percentage. You see the percentage for health decreasing, although the dollar figure goes up slightly. So I don't know if this reflects, the president's thinking and the government's thinking, the Ministry of Finance, on where money should be really allocated towards the industries and the sectors that really employ a few people, or whether maybe they just didn't emphasize as much the fact that this is still an important issue.
Does this government know how many children in A-level are pursuing science courses and are likely to end up applying to medical schools in the universities? How many are likely to end up in schools for clinical officers? Does it know how many actually are in university studying to be engineers? Someone was talking about training in actuarial sciences. Was it you, Chris?
Yes.
At a different discussion here. talking
They are
about
supposed to be the ones running pension sector.
yes, pension
But
sector.
they have ended up in insurance firms.
Nobody knows that these people are being trained. This is the human resource we are training. They are at these levels. This is how we are deploying them. Those who come out and end up riding border borders, we have doctors riding border borders because they failed to get accommodation somewhere else.
Absolutely.
We have teachers. If you do not know a mere statement in your budget, in your State of the Nation address, that talks about the human resource is our greatest bottleneck now. We address that. We address our challenges. Who are you speaking to?
Well, I think, I think that it's, you should obviously be addressing, a wider number of people. And I think, for example, in the science area, he mentioned that the president mentioned he wants to put an emphasis on training students in science and technology, have these research centers, and talks a little bit about primary education in the budget framework paper. But there's a huge leap from primary education to the people who are going to be attending these science courses. There's poor performance of the primary education sector. Something like 50% of kids don't finish primary school. So actually the people...
about 68%.
Okay,
drop
68.
out before primary 7.
Yeah.
You see, Charles,
So-
just allow me, before we get to...
I need Boji to come in because we have about 3 minutes
But we
to
need-
end this segment.
We need this element of people clarified here. Even when they are jumping from policy to policy, still there is no people. The statement I can make it, President Museveni is not planning for you today who's suffering. It's planning for another generation, perhaps where the few are privileged. If you are shifting from education to health sciences, where is the teacher of sciences included in this planning? It is not there. That's what I was saying. They are making a policy without considering the policy implementers, the people who get to interact with the service. So you and me, Charles, have never interacted with the cabinet policy. We interact with the cabinet policy through how the nurse treats you when you go to a hospital, how a policeman handles you when you
On the
are
road.
driving, or how your child is attended to at school.
Charles.
So if government can talk about developing Uganda and it ignores these people who are supposed to actualize their policy directives, then the government is daydreaming.
Although there is also...
Any chance
another
come in
note.
briefly? I'll come back to you,
Okay.
Melina.
Yes, I think on that particular aspect, where I would agree with Chris is there was an admission by the president in the State of the Nation address, and I really found it quite disturbing, for lack of a better word, because he said that the problem that Uganda has at the moment, after of course, giving a split of resources that have gone where, he says that the challenge or the problem that Uganda has is not the money, but the agencies to actually take the money down. And the question I was posing, I was in the studio here with, a group
With
of
Ochichi
panelists,
and,
and Morrison and the others. And I said then, who is supposed to put in place the agencies to actually effect or ensure that the allocations do deliver what is intended to come out of them? So I think really it's a challenge that sometimes we see a lot of good figures going to actually critical areas or some of the areas that need the kind of funding and that kind of thing, but actualizing that becomes a challenge, and I think it's a structural problem. It's an issue of the agencies to actually ensure that what is promised, what is planned for, is in the end actualized. Now, going back to the State of the Nation address, and I was on one hand, or in a certain way, a bit disappointed as well. There were certain areas that I was keenly looking at, and one of them was really the deficit that Uganda Revenue Authority has posted over the years, rather over the months for this financial year. Because, as you know, the deficit is now in the excess of 200 billion Uganda shillings, and who knows, growing. So I expected the president to actually come out and address that particular aspect, because all these things, the planning that we are talking about, can only be actualized if you have the resources to effect those plans, and then of course the agencies to do that. But it has to begin with the resources.
Okay.
But we didn't see that coming out clearly on
But
where we're going to mobilize those
someone
resources.
might ask, maybe we'll answer it in the next segment. The question of saying, aren't we being harsh on the government? Because if you speak to the people of Bundibujo,
Yeah,
that road was finally delivered
yeah.
up to Lamia, and I think it crosses into Congo by about a kilometer, because they had to build a bridge, and they had a crisis to reach at the border, and you can't build a bridge because Congo was not agreeing. So Congo, I think a governor asked that they extend by 1 kilometer into his area, and that's the only tarmac they have in that province. And the president talked about something on during the State of the Nation. He said, do you live in Congo? Because MPs were raising areas which did not have power. And he said, power has reached this point, power has reached that point. And points where power has reached and where wires are moving towards particular areas. So in terms of broader infrastructure...
that power is a business leader here. Power reaching Bundibujo. Did it follow the demand and supply mechanism? How did it end up there?
Isn't it government's responsibility to stimulate that demand by extending certain infrastructure?
What does that power do in Bundibujo? If the road has passed there, how has it helped the
I'm afraid we need to take the break.
No.
Charles, so
let me come in here, Charles, before we take a break, very briefly. I think one of the areas where I would give government credit, really, is in the area of infrastructure, especially rural electrification. Of course, the issue of demand is another question, but taking power there, and then the issue of if you look at dams, the construction, because right now as we talk, we have about we have Isimba, we have Karuma, we have a couple of projects coming up. Katwe, the geothermal power plant, which is supposed to again add some good megawatts to the national grid. I think there government seem to have really come out quite strongly.
Charles, let me give you actually some assignment on here. When you get out of the studio, deploy someone to do an audit of the power stations that have been commissioned and how much power is coming out of them, and see if they tally. Because you have an 18 megawatt installation dam that is producing 3 megawatts. And that is happening in this country, by the way. If you did a careful audit and people at the Ministry of Energy told you the truth, they will tell you that the installed capacity and the production capacity are speaking at different terms, are not in tandem.
To add something to that,
can you pick it up? Can you pick this up after short break? We'll be right back.
Okay.